Well, Casey, the second biggest tech news of the week, I think just behind this Apple lawsuit, was the IPO of Reddit. Reddit, of course, is the big social media site, the so-called front page of the internet. That company went public this week. It was listed on the New York Stock Exchange. It priced its shares at $34, implying a valuation of $6.4 billion for the whole company. And it started trading on Thursday under the ticker symbol RDDT.
Or yeah, Reddit lost $91 million last year, and now you, the public, can get in on the action.
Right. So there are some winners in this IPO. Obviously, Reddit executives and investors are finally getting to cash out some of their shares. Steve Huffman, the CEO of Reddit and previous Hard Fork guest, owns about 3.3% of the company. That is now worth a whole bunch of money. Also a big deal for Condé Nast, the company that publishes magazines, including Wired and The New Yorker. They purchased Reddit in 2006 for $10 million, and their stake is now worth more than $1 billion.
And now that that's happened, that might save up to one job in journalism.
That's true. So actually, one of the other winners that I did not know was going to be a winner of this IPO was Sam Altman, who seems to have his hands in every pie in Silicon Valley. He owns 8.7% of Reddit and is going to make a bunch of money from this IPO as well.
Well, nice to see him catch a break.
So let's talk about the IPO, but let's just talk about, first, why we're talking about this. Because Reddit is not the biggest or most profitable company online. It is not a company we talk about a ton on this show. So why do you care about this IPO?
So to me, Reddit is symbolic of a version of the internet that I really like. It's a place where real people come together to share their expertise, to talk about their passions, and to do it in these niche communities that are often really fun to be in. And they're fun to be in because unlike a TikTok or a Facebook or an Instagram, where every single person on earth is just kind of forced to share one feed, on Reddit, you can just kind of go and find your people, right? You can find the people who want to see oddly satisfying things, or who only want to talk about the NBA, or who need a really good review of a dishwasher, right? And it matters to me because if Reddit cannot succeed in building that business and making that sustainable, it sort of makes me wonder who can, right? We talk so much on this show about artificial intelligence, how we think it is going to change the web. We talk about the concentration of power into the hands of such a few number of these giant companies. And there are precious few of these little baby platforms that have been around forever, that have tens of millions of users, and are still trying to figure out, how do we make this a sustainable thing? So to me, that's the real drama of the Reddit story, and why I want to talk about it today, because if Reddit can make it, maybe this kind of human-centric internet still has a chance, and if it can't, it leaves me worried.
Totally. I totally agree. I think Reddit is one of the last sort of relics of the open web that we still see today. There's a reason that many people, myself included, put reddit.com at the end of our Google searches when we want to find, a review for a new toaster or some parenting advice or whatever it is. That is the way that you find content that is made by humans who might know what they're talking about, who are posting it on a place for people who share similar interests. It is very hard to actually find that stuff outside of Reddit. And so I am very grateful that Reddit still exists. And I hope I'm rooting for it, if only because I think you're right. It is symbolic of this era in the internet where you had these niche communities. They didn't have to use algorithmic ranking to juice engagement. It wasn't basically the machines deciding what people see. It was people deciding what to show each other.
It really is interesting that you can almost divide the internet into two. There is the sort of Google-focused web, which has been search engine optimized into a wasteland. And then you have the Reddit web, which is the place where human beings are still having interesting conversations. Obviously, that is a vast oversimplification, but that's why so many people put Reddit into their search queries, because they want to say to the search engine, let's guide your attention to where the people are talking. So for all of those reasons, it actually does matter what happens to Reddit.
Totally. And I think it's also that Reddit in some ways is a content moderation success story. Reddit used to be, like a lot of these websites, when it started off, it was touted as a free speech bastion, right? It was the CEO, a decade ago was saying things like, we won't censor speech unless it's illegal, like some of the same things that you hear people like Elon Musk saying today. And they were very early among their competitors in realizing, oh, that's actually not producing the experience that users want. We actually do have to take content moderation seriously. Reddit was known as kind of the bowels of the internet, right?
Yeah.
It was like often mentioned in the same breath as like 4chan or something awful, these like notorious cesspools where trolls would just like post gross stuff and harass each other and be racist and sexist and all that stuff.
The Verge, where I worked at the time, wrote a story then called Reddit is a failed state. And it was for exactly that reason.
Totally. So it was sort of seen as a place where the worst of the worst hung out. And that was by design. The company at the time was run by, leaders who thought that this should be a free speech bastion, that it should not censor content unless it was illegal or spammy, that basically anything should go. And I think to their credit, Reddit realized starting in around 2014 and 2015 that they had to actually clean up their site if they wanted to make it a sustainable business and a place where people actually wanted to hang out. So you can go back and sort of trace the evolution, but starting in around 2014, there was a CEO named I.P.O. She started making some changes, banning non-consensual nude images, things like that. Steve Huffman, who was one of the co-founders of Reddit, who took back the site as CEO in 2015, made a bunch more changes. They nuked a bunch of racist and misogynist and violent subreddits, and they really sort of made a few changes that I think really helped them clean their act up and get ready for the IPO that we saw this week.
They also had a really smart idea in content moderation. When people make rules about what you can and can't say online, it just drives people absolutely crazy because it turns out that almost every individual person would draw the line slightly differently. Reddit had a really smart idea, though, which is we're going to set this floor of rules that everyone has to agree to. So you can't post, terrorist content, other horrible things, but it's a pretty limited set of rules. But every individual subreddit, every individual forum, they can raise the ceiling of those rules. So one of my favorite examples is there is a community for women in India on Reddit where the men are only allowed to comment on Wednesdays.
Is that true?
Every other day, the men have to shut up because it's a community for women. And that's such a genius idea because you can't do that on Instagram. You can't do that on Facebook. Again, everybody's sort of crowded into the same room and we make each other miserable. But on Reddit, because they have this unique system, they've been essentially able to decentralize power into these little communities where people tend to be a lot happier.
Yeah, and we know that, enlisting volunteer moderators and giving them power and authority has not always gone well for Reddit. There was that moderator revolt last year, so they have created headaches for themselves by doing this. But I think you're right. It has been a transformative approach to content moderation, not trying to make one set of rules for everyone, but deputizing a bunch of moderators who are passionate and enthusiastic and crucially willing to work for free to do this work for you.
Yes. So that's the story of why we think Reddit is cool and
Right.
why it matters. We should also talk about Reddit as a business now that it's actually selling shares on the open market.
Yeah, let's talk about it. What do you think about Reddit as a business?
So often, Kevin, when a social network has gone public in the past, it has felt like this coming of age moment, right? When you think about companies like Facebook or Twitter or Snap, before they went public, they just faced so much skepticism about whether they could really succeed on the public markets. And so when they actually made it over the finish line, it was this moment of validation of hey, Facebook is for real now, right? And, some of those companies did better on the public markets than others. Reddit doesn't feel that way to me. It is essentially staggering over this finish line like it's been shot in the gut and it has been sort of scrapping for every final yard and it has finally got there. And so this is sort of a lifetime achievement award for a company that really does feel foundational to the modern internet, but has never really figured out how to build much of a business around it.
Yeah, it's notable in part because Reddit is not a young company. Most startups try to go public, sometime in their first decade. Sometimes they hold out for a little bit longer, but Reddit is 19 years old. It was started in 2005, and it's sort of been there through a lot of different shifts in internet life and how we consume information online. And I think in a lot of ways, its trajectory kind of mirrors that of the internet as a whole. But you're right, it has never been good at making money. So talk about why that is.
So Reddit's business, for the most part, has been selling ads. If you've been on Reddit, you've seen this. And, like a lot of these social networks, the game is we'll create native ads that look like Reddit posts. So you're browsing this community, and, I might be browsing my favorite pro wrestling community, r/squared circle. And this really happened to me this week, I saw an ad for Weight Watchers that Weight Watchers had put there. And so I gave it a downvote because I wasn't trying to see that, while I was in my in my wrestling community. But, and maybe that data informs something. But, the idea is, hey, if you have a really good Reddit post and you happen to be a brand, you might be able to get a lot more reach than you would with a traditional ad because people can hit that upvote button and it may sort of spread. So it has basically been an ad business, but not all that great of an ad business. Several years ago, Wired reported that it projected it would make over $1 billion in ad revenue by 2023, but it fell short last year by 20%. So they haven't been able to get all the way there. And so as they look for new sources of revenue, they've started to think about things like, hey, could we actually just sell all of this data to Google and other companies?
Yeah, and I want to talk about that data licensing business, but I want to ask first about the ad business. Like, why is Reddit struggling so much to make money from ads?
Look, if you are an advertiser and you want to reach people on the internet, you have three incredible businesses that already know so much about a vast swath of society. And those businesses are Meta, Google, and Amazon. And let's face it, you can basically reach any American by advertising on one or all three of those platforms, right? And you'll probably be able to do it with more certainty that you reach the audience that you were looking for. You're probably going to get back better data as to whether your ad actually converted into a sale. And the tools themselves are just really sophisticated. So for all of those reasons, the vast majority of the profits in the digital ad industry are concentrated among those three companies. And so companies like Reddit have struggled. And we should say it's not just Reddit that has struggled in this world. Snap, another one of these social networks, went public several years ago and has struggled a lot. And its revenue is 5 times as much as what Reddit is. And they have had a horrible time on the public market because they're just what is considered a subscale advertising company. You don't have enough people, enough data to really make it a great business.
Do you think there's any hope that Reddit's business will improve when it comes to ads, or do you think they basically sort of hit their ceiling?
I mean, I won't say that I think that they've hit their ceiling, but when I look at this company, I just keep thinking about all of the challenges that Snap has had. Snap, in a lot of ways, is a much more ambitious company than Reddit. They've tried a lot more things. They've played around with hardware. I think they brought a lot more innovation to their core app than Reddit has. Reddit looks very similar today to what it did 5 or 10 years ago. So I see this company that has been much more innovative, that has tried much harder, that has invested way more in research and development, and they're flailing on the public markets. And then along comes Reddit with its decent-ish advertising tools, and I just think, oh man, they're going to have a hard time. But what do you think?
Yeah, I think Reddit is sort of a victim of its own popularity in a certain sense. Like they suffer from a massive freebooting problem, which is that every time something goes viral on Reddit, it then gets spread to all these other networks. And so if you want to see like the best oddly satisfying videos of the day, like there's probably an Instagram account that just takes those from Reddit and posts them on its own account. And so if you are an advertiser, you can just sort of reach the same kind of audience on Instagram. The other difference is that Reddit does what's called contextual advertising. So you're not being advertised to on Reddit based on your browser history and what websites you visited and your, location data from your phone. You're being advertised to because you are on a pro wrestling subreddit, and whatever advertisers are on that subreddit have chosen to affiliate themselves with people who like pro wrestling and want to read about it on Reddit.
Mountain Dew, pizza. These are some of the brands that come to mind for me.
Yeah, if you're a degenerate and you want to advertise to other degenerates, you know where to find them.
Exactly.
But I think that what we've seen in the story of digital advertising over the last decade or so is that contextual ads just don't work as well as sort of narrowly targeted ads at individuals based on things like their own, browsing history and the usage of their products. So I just think Reddit is playing in a category that has struggled as a whole. But I have hope. I think that as Google gets flooded with sort of AI-generated stuff and other social networks start to decay as well. Who knows, maybe TikTok gets banned. I do think that a lot of advertisers may start seeing Reddit as a place where they can actually reliably reach real humans.
Well, it is a bold claim, and I guess we'll be able to check back on that over the next few months. But in the meantime, Kevin, as we've noted, they have this other idea, which is a data play.
Yeah, so Reddit is one of the places where AI training companies that make and build and train AI models, go to get high quality information to feed into their models. We know that Reddit has been used to train things like ChatGPT and other sort of AI language models.
Without consent.
Without consent.
Yep.
And we also know that in response to that, Reddit has tried to clamp down on giving developers and AI builders access to its own data. That's part of the reason that it started charging these higher fees last year to developers who wanted to use the Reddit API. So they are not sort of standing back and just letting this happen. And in fact, they are actually trying to get in on it themselves. Reddit recently struck a deal with Google to use Reddit content for training its AI models. That deal was reportedly worth $60 million. Not like a huge amount. That's not going to make or break the company, but it is the kind of thing that Reddit presumably intends to do more of. What do you make of this strategy?
The main thing I make of that, Kevin, is what you just said, which is it's not that much money. This company lost $91 million this year. It signs a deal with Google to provide all of this data so that Google can do essentially whatever it wants with it, but it's probably mostly going to train its AI models. And it's worth $60 million. So even if you assume that Reddit is able to sign a similar deal with an OpenAI, maybe an Anthropic, and maybe that gets up to like $180 million a year, it's still a pretty small business. And like this is one of the best shots that they have left in their reserve, right? We know about how big their ad business is. This data business, it's looking much more like a complement to the ad business than something that's going to create this bright new feature for this website.
Yeah, I think you're right. It's not going to change their fortunes overnight, but I do think it is a signal that what Reddit actually has, which is a place where people, type reddit.com into their browsers because they want to go there and discuss things that they're passionate about. I do think that the value of that will grow over time as more and more of the internet gets sort of eaten by AI-generated sludge. And so I think that Reddit is smart to bet on its future as, among other things, a place where anyone, not just AI developers, but where users, where other businesses who want to see or learn from people talking about real things will go. I don't know. I don't know that I would do anything differently if I was Reddit, but I do think that it's a little sad that a website that is almost 20 years old, that has, untold reserves of high quality discussions and frankly some low quality discussions too, that it's only worth $60 million to Google.
Yeah, and I should also say that this company is just not growing its user base, really. It's pretty flat. Wired reported it was sort of looking at what it has been telling investors over the past few years, and they've been basically stuck at around 500 million monthly visitors, something like 73 million, 76 million visitors a day. A lot of the people who visit Reddit are not logged in. That makes it harder to sell them ads. So they do just like kind of have a growth problem. Again, that's why I say that they kind of staggered over the finish line. Like it just doesn't feel like this is a company that has the wind at its back when it comes to user growth, revenue growth, new business ideas, right? That's like a pretty challenging set of circumstances to carry into the public markets.
So one of the notable things about this IPO is that in addition to offering its stock to the public, Reddit also offered it to its own users. The company allowed longtime Redditors and moderators of some of its most popular subreddits to buy shares of the company's stock at the IPO price. And this was, I think, an attempt to kind of frame this IPO as a good thing for Reddit's community as a whole, not just for the investors and executives who got to cash out their shares, to sort of maybe capture some of the meme stock potential of a Reddit IPO and maybe get users excited about the fact that they would be able to actually make money from this thing that they had been doing for free for so many years. Do you think this was a good idea?
I think it is a nice idea, especially to go out to these unpaid moderators who in many ways are the backbone of Reddit and say, we want to do something nice for you. We're going to give it this stock to you at the IPO price. The reason that matters is that typically these IPOs are priced so that they pop on the first day, the price goes up. It's a long way of saying that IPO prices are generally underpriced, right? So if that is the case, then you would hope that some of these Redditors would make a little bit of money off of the IPO, and that's great. My thing though would just be like, why is this a one-time thing? Like, why don't you just like let moderators earn RSUs in the company like through the course of doing business? I think Reddit should take this idea and build on it, I guess would be my message.
Yeah, I mean, Reddit has never, for sort of strange and quirky reasons, it has never had trouble convincing people to work for free moderating subreddits that they're passionate about. So I don't know that it feels like it has to start, routinely issuing stock to people who run, a pro wrestling subreddit or a history subreddit or a gardening subreddit. That said, I think this was a good gesture on the company's part. And I think it creates the potential to sort of ease some of these conflicts that have historically plagued Reddit between moderators of popular subreddits and executives who run the company, who have clashed many times over the years, not just about this data licensing thing last year. They've clashed repeatedly and routinely. You could almost set your watch by it over the years. And so I wonder if this actually creates a kind of aligned incentive structure, because now moderators, some of them, the ones who chose to buy stock in Reddit at the IPO price, actually have kind of the same incentives as the people who work at the company in terms of making it a more profitable business. And I wonder if last year, when this drama erupted over these API changes, if moderators might have been a little easier to please if you could go to them as Reddit and say, look, we're making these changes. We know this is annoying. We know it's not something that you like, but look, it's going to open up this data licensing business to AI companies. It's going to make us all more money. I wonder if that would have quelled the rebellion.
I don't think it would have. I basically completely disagree with this, because I think that the average Reddit user has never been there to make money. They're there to have a good time. They're there to be entertained. They're there to learn. They want a website that works well. That is not actually the incentive that Steve Huffman has as the CEO. His incentive is to make the company profitable. During last year's controversy, somebody asked him, like, essentially, when are you going to stop with all of these changes that you're making? And he said, when we become profitable. The median user of Reddit, I would wager, doesn't care if the site becomes profitable, and I don't think giving them a few shares of stock really changes that equation. I think you'd have to essentially buy off the entire user base to the point where they were collectively one of the largest shareholders in the company. What I suspect is going to happen instead is that a relatively few number of Reddit users are going to own the stock, and some private equity firm or some other group of activist shareholders are going to come in 2 years, and they're going to say, this business sucks, we're taking it private, we're going to introduce a bunch of horrible new monetization schemes, and we will have another Reddit revolt.
God, that would be so depressing. And I totally think it's the most likely outcome here is that, activist investors say we could make a lot more money if we just jam everyone's feed full of like AI garbage, and that seems like a much more profitable business. Or we're going to turn this into TikTok, start emphasizing short form video, and I can totally see that happening, and it really bums me out. And so I hope, for its own sake and for the sake of the internet at large, that Reddit continues to be Reddit in some recognizable form.
Me too. Hey, that's the end of this clip. If you liked what you saw, head on over to our page and subscribe, and you can get the full podcast. We do a show like this almost every week on tech and the future. Head on over there now and subscribe.